The hearths are set, mantels are decorated. Our trees are festooned with shiny baubles, twinkling lights, and packages with bows and ribbons set underneath. Tonight, a story of Christmas and imagination, an abridged selection from the Nutcracker and Mouse King by E.T.A Hoffmann. Enjoy. For the entire 24th of December, the children of Medical Officer Stahlbaum were not permitted to step inside the intermediary room, much less the magnificent showcase next door. Fritz and Marie sat huddled together in a corner of the back room. The deep evening dusk had set in, and the children felt quite eerie because, as was usual on this day, no light had been brought in. Fritz quite secretly whispered to his younger sister, she had just turned 7, that he had heard a rustling and murmuring and soft throbbing in the locked room since early that morning. Also, not long ago, Fritz went on, a short, dark man with a large casket under his arm had stolen across the vestibule. However, said Fritz, he knew quite well that it was none other than Godfather Drosselmeyer. Marie joyfully clapped her little hands and exclaimed, "Ah, I wonder what lovely presents he's made for us." The Supreme Court Justice Drosselmeyer was anything but handsome. His face was covered with wrinkles, and he wore a big black patch instead of a right eye. He also had no hair on his head, which is why he sported a very lovely periwig, made of spun glass and very artistic. Indeed, the godfather was altogether a very artistic man, who even knew a thing or two about clocks, and would actually build them. So if any of the beautiful clocks in Stahlbaum's home fell ill and wouldn't sing, Godfather Drosselmeyer would come by, remove his glass periwig, take off his snug yellow vest, tie on a blue apron, and insert sharp instruments into the gears. It was very painful for little Marie, but it didn't harm the clocks at all. In fact, the clock even grew lively, and it started cheerfully humming, striking, and singing again, much to everyone's delight. Whenever Drosselmeyer visited them, he would bring something nice for the children. His pocket might contain a mannequin that could twist its eyes and bow, which was comical to see. Or Drosselmeyer might have a box from which a little bird came hopping out, or he might have something utterly different. But for Christmas, Drosselmeyer always completed a gorgeous artistic work, which cost him a great effort. That is why, after showing the gift, the parents very cautiously stored it away. "Ah, I wonder what lovely presents he's made for us," Marie exclaimed. Fritz decided that this year it could be nothing but a fortress, where all kinds of very handsome soldiers drilled and marched to and fro. Next, other soldiers would have to storm and invade the fortress. But now the inside soldiers boldly shot their cannons, making them boom and burst. No, Marie interrupted Fritz. Godfather Drosselmeyer told me about a beautiful park with a huge lake and with marvelous swans gliding about and wearing golden neckbands and singing the loveliest songs. Then a little girl comes to the lake and entices the swans and feeds them sweet marzipan. "Swans don't eat marzipan," Fritz broke in quite roughly. "And Godfather Drosselmeyer can't make a whole park, actually. We get little out of his toys. They're promptly taken away from us. So I much prefer what Mama and Papa give us. We can keep their presents nicely and do whatever we like with them." Now the children debated what their parents would bring them. Marie felt that Fräulein Truchen, her large doll, was changing deeply. For, clumsier than ever, she fell on the floor every moment. This didn't happen without a nasty grin, and there was no further thought of the cleanliness of her garments. Nor did a thorough scolding help. Also, Mama, we are told, smiled with such delight at Gretchen's small parasol. Fritz, by contrast, assured the others that his loyal stable lacked a good sorrel, just as his troops fully lacked a cavalry. Papa was well aware of that. So the children knew that their parents had bought them all kinds of beautiful presents, which they now displayed. And they were equally convinced that, as if touched by fruitful hands, every Christmas gift would bring marvelous pleasure like no other. The children, who kept whispering about what they expected presents, were reminded of that pleasure by their older sister Louise. By now it had grown completely dark. Fritz and Marie, thoroughly pressed together, did not dare say another word. It sounded as if rustling wings encircled them, and as if they could catch a very distant and very splendid music. At that moment they heard a bright silvery chime. Pling-ling, pling-ling. The doors burst open, and the radiance erupting into the large room was so deep that the children cried out, "Ah! Ah!" I turn to you, gentle reader or listener, and I picture you vividly at your last Christmas table, which is richly adorned with gorgeous multicolored presents. You will then envisage how the children halted in sentence and with shining eyes. You will then envision how, after a while, Marie cried out with a deep sigh, "Oh, how beautiful! Oh, how beautiful!" And Fritz tried out his caprioles, which were very successful. But the children had to save being devout and well-behaved the entire year, for never had they such splendid and such beautiful gifts as this time. The huge fir tree in the center carried many gold and silver apples, and like buds and blossoms, the sugared almonds and colorful bonbons, and goodness knows what other tidbits emerged from all the branches. However, the loveliest and most praiseworthy feature of the wonder tree was the myriad of tiny lights that twinkled like tiny stars in its dark boughs. And the tree itself, shining in and out, warmly invited the children to pick its blooms and fruits. Around the tree, everything shone very grand and bright. What gorgeous things there were! Why, who could describe them all? Marie saw the most delicate dolls, all kinds of small, clean implements, and, what was loveliest to view, a silk frock, daintily garnished with party-colored ribbons, hung from a rack right in front of Marie so she could observe the dress from all sides. And that is what she did, while exclaiming over and over, "Oh, the darling little frock! Oh, what a lovely little frock! And I'll be quite confident that I'll be allowed to wear it." Meanwhile, Fritz, trotting and galloping around the table 3 or 4 times, was testing the new sorrel, which he had indeed found on the table fenced in. Climbing back down, Fritz thought that the sorrel was a wild beast, but it didn't matter. Fritz would certainly overcome it, and he mustered the new squadrons of hussars, who were magnificently garbed in red and gold and carried silver weapons. The horses they were riding were so shiny white you might have almost believed that they were pure silver too. The children, a bit calmer now, wanted to pounce on the picture book, which were lying open, so you could see all sorts of very lovely blossoms and gaudy people and delightful children playing. And they were all painted so naturally, as if they could truly live and speak. Yes, indeed, the children were about to pounce on these wonderful books when the doorbell rang again. Knowing that now Godfather Drosselmeyer would offer his gifts, the children ran over to the table, which was standing alongside the wall. The screen that had hidden the table for such a long time was quickly removed. And what did the children witness? On a green lawn embellished with colorful flowers stood a fabulous castle with many plate-glass windows and golden turrets. A glockenspiel resounded, doors and windows opened, and you could see very tiny but dainty ladies and gentlemen in plumed hats with long trains strolling through the chambers. The middle room had so many burning candles in silver chandeliers that it looked as if they were fully ablaze, and children in short vests and jerkins were dancing to the sound of the glockenspiel. A gentleman in an emerald cape often peered through the window, beckoning the onlookers, and disappeared again, just as Godfather Drosselmeyer himself, but scarcely larger than Papa's thumb, at times stood below, at the castle gates, then stepped back inside. With elbows propped on the table, Fritz had looked at the beautiful castle and the strolling and dancing figurines. Then he said, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, let me into your castle." Drosselmeyer indicated that this was out of the question, and he was right, for it was foolish of Fritz to wish to enter a castle that, together with its golden turrets, was not as tall as Fritz himself, and Fritz understood. After a time, when the ladies and gentlemen were strolling to and fro in the same fashion, the children were dancing, the Emerald Man was peering out the same window, and Godfather Drosselmeyer stationed himself at the gates, Fritz asked impatiently, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, why don't you come out through the other door over there?" "That won't do, dear little Fritz," Drosselmeyer replied. "Well then, let him go," Fritz went on. "Let the Green Man go strolling with the others. After all, he keeps peering out." "That won't do either," Drosselmeyer again replied. "Then tell the children to come down," cried Fritz. "I want to investigate them more closely." "Oh, none of this will really do," said Drosselmeyer, annoyed. "The mechanics are set up, and that's how they must stay." "Really," Fritz drawled, "none of this will do. Listen, Godfather Drosselmeyer, if those small polished things in the castle can only keep repeating themselves, then they're not worth much, and I don't especially have to call for them. I need to praise my hussars. They have to maneuver forward, backward, whatever I wish, and they're not locked in any house." And with that, Fritz jumped out toward the Christmas table, and he had his squadron leap back and forth on his silver horses, trotting and wheeling and smashing and firing to his heart's content. Marie had likewise stolen away so gently, for she too had soon gotten fed up with the dancing and meandering of the tiny dolls in the castle. Though well behaved and well brought up as she was, she didn't voice her annoyance as did Brother Fitz. Drosselmeyer spoke rather crossly to the parents. "Such artistic work is not meant for senseless children. I'm simply going to pack up my castle." However, the mother came over and had the godfather explain the inner construction and the very wonderful and very creative gear unit, which set teensy dolls moving. The counselor took everything apart and then put it together again. While laboring, he turned cheerful again and gave the children a few lovely tan men and women with golden hands, legs, and faces. They were made entirely out of the fanciest gingerbread, and they were so sweet and pleasant as to greatly delight Fitz and Marie. Sister Louise, as Mother wished, had put on the lovely frock that was one of her gifts, and she looked gorgeous. However, when she was likewise about to don her dress, Marie felt that she would rather see it on Louise for a bit, and her mother was glad to comply. Actually, Marie didn't want to leave the Christmas table, for she had discovered something that no one else had yet noticed. You see, the review of Fritz's hussars, who had paraded closely past the tree, had revealed an excellent little man who stood there, quiet and modest, as if calmly awaiting his turn. Granted, there was a lot to object to in his stature, for aside from the fact that his somewhat lengthy and powerful upper body didn't quite fit in the tiny, skinny legs, his head likewise seemed much too big. To a great extent, amends were made by his attractive clothes, which suggested a man of taste and breeding. After all, he sported a very lovely, shiny, violet dolman with countless white braids and buttons. He also wore the loveliest trousers and finest ankle boots that had ever graced the feet of a little student, much less an officer. These boots were as snug on the delicate little legs as if they were perfect fit. Now, it was funny that he had donned a miner's cap, and that he had accompanied his garb in black with a slim, clumsy cape that looked like wood. Meanwhile, Marie felt that Godfather Drosselmeyer had also slung an awful morning coat around his shoulders and put on a dreadful cap, but he was still a very dear godfather. Marie had likewise mused that no matter how delicate the little man, the godfather would never be as appealing as he. The little girl had instantly liked the nice man, and the more she looked at him, the more she realized what a gentle and kindly face he had. The light green, bulging eyes promised nothing but friendship and benevolence. It was good for the man to place a well-groomed white cotton beard on his chin, since you could perceive the sweetest smile of the deep red lips all the more clearly. "Ah!" Marie finally exclaimed. "Ah, dear father, who owns that darling little man over on the tree there?" "He," the father answered, "he, my dear child, should work hard for all of us. He should crack the hard nuts for us nicely, and he should belong to Louise as much as he belongs to you and to Fritz." The father then removed him cautiously from the table, and raising the wooden cape aloft, the mannequin opened his mouth wide, wide, and showed 2 rows of very sharp, very tiny white teeth. When told to do so, Marie inserted a nut, and crack, crack, he chewed up the nut so that the shell dropped away, and the sweet kernel itself ended up in Marie's hand. By now, everyone, including Marie, had to know that the dainty little man was an offspring of the very dynasty of Nutcrackers, and was practicing his profession. She shouted for joy, but then her father spoke. "Since, dear Marie, you loved friend Nutcracker so much, you must shield and shelter him especially, even despite the fact that, as I have said, Louise and Fritz have as much right to use him as you." Marie promptly took Nutcracker in her arms and had him crack nuts, though she picked the smallest ones. That way the mannequin wouldn't have to open his mouth very wide, which basically didn't look so good. Louise joined Marie, and friend Nutcracker also had to perform his duties for Louise, which he didn't seem to mind doing, since he smiled very amiably all the time. Fritz, meanwhile, had grown tired from all the riding and drilling, and when he heard the pleasurable cracking of nuts, he sprang over to his sisters and roared with laughter at the quaint mannequin. Now that Fritz also wanted to eat nuts, the little man passed from hand to hand, unable to halt his snapping open and shut. Fritz kept shoving in the biggest and hardest nuts. All at once, they heard a double crack. Then 3 little teeth fell out of Nutcracker's mouth, and his whole lower jaw turned loose and wobbly. "Oh, my poor dear Nutcracker!" exclaimed Marie, whisking him out of Fritz's hands. "He's a stupid, simple-minded guy," said Fritz. "He wants to be a Nutcracker, but he has no decent teeth. He probably doesn't understand his own work. Hand him over, Marie. He has to chew up nuts for me, even if he loses his remaining teeth, even his entire jaw in the bargain. Who cares about that good-for-nothing?" "No, no," Marie wept. "You're not going to get him. My dear Nutcracker, just look at the way he watches me so sorrowfully and shows me his little injured mouth. But you're a cold-hearted person, Fritz. You beat your horses, and you even let a soldier be shot dead." "That's the way it has to be. You just don't understand," cried Fritz. "Anyway, Nutcracker belongs to me as much as he belongs to you. Hand him over." Marie began sobbing hard, and she quickly wrapped up the sick Nutcracker in her tiny handkerchief. The parents came over with Godfather Drosselmeyer, who, to Marie's great regret, sided with Fritz. However, her father said, "I deliberately placed Nutcracker under Marie's protection, and now that I see she needs him, she has full power over Nutcracker with no interference from anyone." Incidentally, I'm very surprised that Fritz demanded further services from somebody who has been injured in service. After all, as a good military man, he should know that wounded soldiers never line up in rank and file. Fritz was very ashamed, and without concerning himself any further about nuts and about Nutcracker, he stole over to the other side of the table. There, after setting the appropriate outposts, the hussars had gone to their night quarters. As for Marie, she hunted down Nutcracker's lost teeth. Around his wounded chin, she had wrapped a lovely white ribbon, which she had detached from her frock and bound up. The poor little man had looked very pale and frightened, and so Marie had wrapped him more gingerly than before in her cloth. Cradling him in her arms like a baby, she looked at the lovely pictures in the new picture book, which lay out today among all the other gifts. Contrary to her usual behavior, Marie got quite angry when Godfather Drosselmeyer kept laughing and asking how she managed to remain so lovely despite that thoroughly hideous mannequin. Now she recalled the bizarre comparison she had drawn with Drosselmeyer at first sight, and she spoke very earnestly. "Who knows, dear Godfather? If you were spruced up like my dear Nutcracker, and if you had on such lovely shiny ankle boots, who knows if you wouldn't be as beautiful as he?" Marie couldn't tell why her parents laughed so loudly, and why Supreme Court Counselor developed a red nose and didn't laugh as clearly as before. There must have been a special reason. When you step through the door into the home of the medical counselor, you'll find a tall glass cabinet on the broad wall to your left. The shelves store all the lovely presents that are given to the children every year. Louise was still very little when her father ordered the cabinet from a very skillful cabinet maker. The man inserted the panes so brightly. Indeed, he knew how to equip the entire showcase so adroitly that everything inside looked almost shinier and lovelier than if you were holding it yourself. The top shelf, unattainable for Marie and Fritz, held Drosselmeyer's artworks. Right below was the shelf for the picture books. The two lowest shelves could be filled by Marie and Fritz, however they wished, but usually Marie assigned the bottom shelf for her dolls to live on, while on the shelf overhead, Fritz drove his troops into the cantonments. The same thing happened today. While Fritz had stationed his hussars overhead, Marie had put Fräulein Trunchen aside, had placed the new and spruced-up doll in the very elegantly appointed room, and had invited herself to some delicious confectionery with Marie. It was late in the evening. Indeed, midnight was approaching, and Drosselmeyer had long since gone home. However, Marie and Fritz still couldn't leave the glass cabinet, no matter how much their mother kept ordering them to finally get to bed. "It's true!" Fritz exclaimed at last. "Those poor guys," he meant his hussar, "they want to have their rest too, and so long as I'm here, no one dares to catch 40 winks. I already know that." Fritz left, but Marie begged and begged. "Just a wee bit longer, please. Dear mother, let me stay just a wee bit longer. I have to take care of a few things. When I'm done, I'll go straight to bed." Marie was a devout and reasonable child, and so her good mother had no qualms about leaving her alone with her toys. Still, her mother wanted to keep Marie from being all too deeply tempted by the new doll and the lovely playthings. Forgetting about the candles burning all around the wall closet, the mother snuffed all of them, so that only the lamp suspended in the middle of the ceiling spread a gentle, graceful light. "Come in soon, dear Marie. Otherwise you won't get up at the right time tomorrow," exclaimed the mother, withdrawing to the bedroom. As soon as Marie was alone, she quickly went over to do what was quite proper in her mind, and what she could not tell her mother, though she did not know why. Marie still had the wounded Nutcracker wrapped in her handkerchief, and she carried him in her arms. Now she placed him cautiously on the table, unwrapped him softly, and tended to the injuries. Nutcracker was very pale, but he beamed so ruefully and amiably that his smile shot right through her heart. "Ah, dear little Nutcracker," she murmured very softly. "Please don't be angry at me because my brother Fitz hurt you so deeply. He didn't really mean it so badly. He's just gotten a bit hard-hearted in the wild military. Otherwise, he's truly a fine boy. You can count on it. But now I want to nurse you very tenderly until you're fully sound and cheery again. As for reinserting your little teeth thoroughly and properly and straightening out your shoulders, Godfather Drosselmeyer can take care of all of that. He's an expert in such matters." However, Marie could not finish, for when she pronounced Drosselmeyer's name, Friend Nutcracker's face twisted up devilishly, and his eyes virtually emitted sparkling green prickles. But the moment Marie tried to get properly released, she was again viewed by the mournfully smiling face of honest Nutcracker, and now she knew that it was the draught and the quickly blazing ray of the lamp that had totally distorted his features. "Aren't I a silly little girl? Scared so easily that I even believe this little wooden doll can make faces. Still, I care so much for Nutcracker because he's so funny and yet so kind, and that's why he has to be nursed as is proper." Marie now took Friend Nutcracker by the arm, went over to the glass cabinet, huddled in front of it, and spoke to the new doll. "Pretty, pretty please, Fräulein Clarchen. Please give up my little bed for sick, wounded Nutcracker, and make do with the sofa as best you can. Don't forget that you're very healthy and powerful. Otherwise, you wouldn't have such thick, dark red cheeks. And don't forget that very few of the most gorgeous dolls own such soft couches. In her full, shiny Christmas garb, Fräulein Klarken looked very noble and very angry, and she didn't breathe a word. "Now, why am I making such a fuss?" asked Marie. She pulled out the bed, tucked dear Nutcracker in very gently and delicately, and wrapped him up with a beautiful little ribbon. She normally wrapped the ribbon around her body. However, this time, she wrapped it around his injured shoulder and covered him up all the way up to his nose. "But he mustn't remain with naughty Klärchen," Marie went on. She pulled up the little bed together with the Nutcracker, who was laying on it, and she placed them on the top shelf. In this way, the little bed lay right next to the lovely village where Fritz's hussars were billeted. Marie locked the cabinet and was about to go to the bedroom when, now listen, children, when she caught a soft whimpering and murmuring and rustling all around, between the oven, behind the chairs, behind the cabinets. The wall clock hummed louder and louder, but it couldn't strike. Marie looked up. The big gilded owl perching on the clock had lowered its wings, covering the whole timepiece and poking forth the ugly cobblestone with the hooked nose. And the noises grew louder, and words could be made out. Click, clock, tock, clock, tick, tock. And everyone has to hum softly, hum softly. After all, Mouse King has a fine ear. Hum, hum, hum. Strike, chime, do. Soon there will be few. And the humming resounded dull and hoarse 12 times. Marie shuddered dreadfully, and she would almost have dashed off in horror if she had not spotted Godfather Drosselmeyer, who sat on the wall clock in lieu of the owl, his yellow coat-tails dangling like wings on both sides. However, Marie pulled herself together, and she exclaimed loudly and tearfully, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, Godfather Drosselmeyer, what are you doing up there? Come down to me and stop frightening me, you nasty Godfather Drosselmeyer." However, now a wild giggling and whistling started all around, and virtually 1,000 little feet were trotting and scurrying behind the walls, and virtually 1,000 little candle stubs were flickering through the cracks in the floorboards. Still, these weren't candle stubs. No, these were tiny, sparkling eyes, and Marie realized that mice were peering out and preparing themselves everywhere. Soon the room reverberated with trot-trot and hop-hop. Brighter and denser squads of mice were galloping to and fro, and they finally lined up in rank and file the way Fritz stationed his soldiers before a battle. Marie found this very funny, and unlike some other children, she didn't have a natural aversion to mice. Indeed, she was about to shed any terror she might have felt, when all at once the room began to whistle so sharply and so outrageously that she had to shudder. Ah, what did she notice now? No, truly, my honored reader, I know that your heart is in the right place. But if you had just seen what Marie saw now, you would have truly dashed away. I even feel that you would have leapt into bed and pulled the covers much farther over your ears than necessary. Ah, poor Marie could not even do that, for, just listen, children, right at her feet, as if driven by subterranean force, the ground spurted out sand and lime and crumbling wall stones, and 7 mouse heads with 7 brightly sparkling crowns loomed high from the ground, hissing and whistling quite unbearably. Soon the mouse body, to whose neck the 7 heads were attached, likewise worked its way out completely, and the large mouse, adorned with 7 diadems, exulted in full chorus. Squeaking loudly 3 times, the mouse faced the entire army, which suddenly got moving. Hot, hot, trot, trot. It headed straight toward the cabinet. Straight toward Marie, who was standing right up next to the glass door. Marie's heart had beaten so loudly in fear and terror that she thought it might burst out of her chest, and she would have then died. But now she felt as if the blood were frozen in her veins. Half fainting, she staggered backwards, hearing clerk, clerk, purr, purr, and the glass pane of the cabinet, elbowed by Marie, collapsed in fragments. At that moment, Marie felt a truly sharp pain in her left arm, but her heart suddenly felt much lighter. She now heard no squeaking or piping. Everything was very still, and even though she didn't care to have a look, she did believe that the mice, frightened by the tinkling of the glass shards, had retreated into their own holes. But just what was that? Right behind Marie, strange noises were now heard from the cabinet, and very fine voices resounded. Wake up to the battle this very night. Wake up to the battle. And harmonious chimes jingled sweetly and gracefully. Ah, that's my little glockenspiel, cried Marie, jumping aside. Now she saw a bizarre lighting in the cabinet, a puttering and fiddling around. There were several dolls hurrying and scurrying about and fighting with their skinny arms. All at once, Nutcracker sat up, flung the cover far away, and leapt out of the bed with both feet, shouting, "Crack, crack, crack! Foolish mice pack! Crick, crack, real sack!" And with that, Nutcracker drew his little sword and waved it in the air and cried, "You, my dear friends and vassals and brothers, do you wish to help me in this hard struggle?" 3 scaramouches promptly retorted, as did 1 pantaloon, 4 chimney sweeps, 2 zitherists, and 1 drummer. "Yes, sir, we submit to you in steadfast devotion, and we march with you into death, struggle, and victory!" And they followed the passionate Nutcracker, who dared to make the perilous leap from the top shelf. It was no use their jumping, for not only did they wear rich garments of cloth and silk, but there wasn't much more inside of them than chaff and cotton. That is why they plopped down like sacks of wool. Poor Nutcracker would certainly have broken his arms and his legs, for just imagine, it was nearly 2 feet high above the shelf where he was standing to the bottom, and his body was as brittle as if carved out of lindenwood. Yes, indeed, Nutcracker would have certainly broken his arms and legs if, in the moment of his leap, Fraulein Clarken had not also jumped from the sofa and caught the hero's drawn sword in her soft arms. "Oh, you dear sweet Clarken," Marie sobbed. "How I misunderstood you! You would have certainly been glad to give up your little bed to friend Nutcracker." But now Fraulein spoke. "If you do not wish, O Lord, sick and wounded as you are, to join the struggle and the peril, then see how your courageous vassals, belligerent and certain of victory, gather together. Scaramouche, Pantaloon, Chimney Sweep, Zitherist, and Drummer are already downstairs. You may wish, sir, to rest in my arms or to watch your victory from my plumed hat." Those were Fraulein's words, but Nutcracker was so very unruly, and he kicked so hard that Fraulein had to drop him on the floor. However, at that instant, Nutcracker knelt down politely on one knee and said, "Oh, my lady, I will remember you in charm and grace while I tussle and struggle." "Do not, oh my lady, wish to waste your grace on me," he faltered, took a deep breath, and then he tore the ribbon from Marie's shoulder. He pressed the ribbon against his lips and hung the ribbon around his waist like an officer's sash. And then, boldly swinging his sword, quickly and nimbly, he sprang like a tiny bird across the ridge on the floor. Now, what comes next? When Nutcracker springs down, the squealing and squeaking likewise resume. Ah, the obnoxious crews of countless mice stay under the big table, and the horrible mouse with the 7 heads loom all over them. What is next?